Hi everyone, I am Dr. Andi. It is time for today's Facebook Live. While I'm giving everybody the opportunity to log on and join us, I thought I'd just give you all a brief introduction into who I am, a little bit more about my background, and then I will launch into your questions. I always love joining these lives on Wednesdays. It's always been my passion to share and to educate. So I know that a lot of us are in lockdown right now, so it's really nice to connect with the Pruvit community in this way. So I hope you're all staying safe and healthy wherever you might be. So a little bit of background about myself. Again, I am Dr. Andi. I am a naturopathic physician. I've been practicing in Toronto for 11 years now, which seems like ages every time I say that. My focus used to be more on sports medicine. I was a personal trainer, a dancer, I did martial arts. And then I slowly moved more into hormonal balance, metabolic nutrition, fat loss, and my practice just sort of naturally moved in that direction. Keto and low carb has been the foundation of my treatment for many years. I personally have been keto since my early 20s. And so it's something I've been introducing to my patients in my practice from that time. And then obviously with the introduction of exogenous ketones, that's made a really significant, difference as well for those who just couldn't engage in the ketogenic diet or who wanted to optimize the diet that they were already on. In our clinic, we have about 19 practitioners. We have naturopaths, medical doctors, osteopaths, chiropractors, nutritionists, and all of us function from that low-carb keto standpoint. Our focus, again, is hormonal balance. We have a very large anti-aging focus in our practice, and we also work a lot with cognition and Alzheimer's, reversing, preventing cognitive decline. And then also working with people with chronic illness, so Lyme disease, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, chronic pain. So that's a really big focus of our practice. And again, our foundation for those patients is always a low-carb keto lifestyle or exogenous ketones, and obviously we work off of that and build from there. So I'm going to get started. I can answer all your questions. I can see them all coming in already. So the first question, can ketones burn out your adrenal glands? So the answer to that is no. Ketones are not going to burn out your adrenal glands. What you do have to be careful of, though, if you have adrenal fatigue, is the caffeine. So if you do have some adrenal issues, then I would use a caffeine-free version just to make sure you're not exacerbating it. Also, if you have sort of excessive stress or anything like that, if you feel like you have really high cortisol levels and you're sort of existing in that fight or flight state, those individuals generally want to avoid caffeine because obviously caffeine is very stimulating and it's going to stimulate an overstressed adrenal gland already. So that would be my suggestion for anyone with an adrenal issue. But no, ketones will not burn out your adrenals. And the interesting thing about ketones is what they've shown is that beta hydroxybutyrate can actually encourage the production of GABA. GABA is a very common neurotransmitter. So neurotransmitters are chemical messengers in the brain. I will often give GABA to patients if they are having anxiety or if they're having panic attacks or something like that, just to calm the nervous system down. And what they found is that beta hydroxybutyrate can actually encourage that transition from that sympathetic state, so that state where you're in that fight or flight mode. So it can actually encourage taking you from the fight or flight sympathetic stress state into the parasympathetic nervous system. So very calming to the nervous system and could potentially calm that stress response as well. So no, not going to burn out your adrenal glands, but I would encourage that you use a caffeine-free version. So how best can you explain the Ruby Red Unleashed? So this is one of the black label versions of ketones. So essentially what you're getting with the black label products is a little bit more ketone content. You're also getting a little bit more caffeine. So you have to be aware of that. If you have a caffeine sensitivity, you have to be aware of that. Also the time of day that you're taking it. It also has an addition of fulvic minerals. And so we know that those fulvic minerals have been shown to play a role in our gut health, in our cellular signaling. There's actually some really interesting research looking at the role of fulvic minerals in hormones, specifically testosterone, and the potential to improve those hormone levels. So there's some really interesting research in that space as well. So those are really the key differences. So if you're looking for a little bit more ketone content, a little bit more caffeine and access to some of those additional minerals, then that would be a really great choice. So if you drink ketones an hour and a half before a workout, will drinking proton afterwards be a waste? So I'm not sure if you mean will drinking proton So will drinking proton after your workout be a waste? And so if that's what you mean, then no, it's not going to be a waste at all. That's actually a really great time to drink that. If you're taking your ketones an hour and a half before workout, then take proton again and then workout, you might want to split that up a little bit. But the reason it's not a waste to take after your workout is because your body will make use of those ketones that you have ingested during exercise. And a lot of people will talk about testing their ketones, and I just saw a question about that as well. Somebody drinking ketones and they measure their ketone levels, and 30 minutes later they haven't registered ketones. So the important thing is how you're testing your ketone levels. I generally recommend testing maybe around that 45-minute mark and testing your blood ketones, not your urinary ketones, because the more adept you become at making use of ketones, the more your body will use and the fewer ketones you'll release in your urine. So make sure you're checking your blood ketones. So when it comes to your workout, the demand for an energy source is much higher during exercise. So your body is more likely to use all the ketones you've just consumed. So your heart, brain, muscle is looking for a fuel source, and it's going to choose the ketones when it has it available. So by the time your workout is over, you will probably have made use of all the ketones in your system. So absolutely drinking your proton after a workout would be beneficial to re-elevate those ketone levels. So that's a really great way to split it up. Can a 13-year-old drink caffeine-free ketones and Mitoplex? So yes, a 13-year-old can drink Mitoplex. When it comes to supplementation, once you're 13 plus, that's when we start dosing more sort of adult dosing. So from an electrolyte standpoint, they could take the electrolytes. From a caffeine-free ketone standpoint, it's important to remember that ketones have been improved for use in adults, not in children. That said, I do have some patients that I will introduce ketones with. I've given some ketones to my daughter, but again, that's something you have to work with your healthcare provider with to determine that that is safe for each individual child, and the Pruvit ketones are approved for adults 18 plus. So again, work with your healthcare provider, make sure they say that that's the right option for you if you choose to give them to your child. Where does one start with keto? It all seems so intimidating for me. That is such a common question. I get that question all the time. The idea that a ketogenic diet is extremely intimidating. Where do you incorporate ketones? If you're not keto, should you bother with the ketones? So I always tell people just to sort of take a deep breath and slow down. First things first, the things I introduce to my patients very first, to start drinking your ketones and start intermittent fasting, and then eventually working up to a reboot. So if you don't change a single thing in your diet, start taking your exogenous ketones, introduce intermittent fasting, working up to the more extended fasting, and then slowly start to introduce keto principles. The problem when people first start is we say introduce fat, and often people will introduce the fats in their diet and not decrease the carbohydrate consumption. So now you're high carb and high fat, which means you're just going to gain weight. So that's the first problem. The other thing is when you Google, it tells you that you can eat bacon and cream all day long. That is not how I encourage doing keto. I encourage more healthy sources of fats: avocado, coconut oil, olive oil, nuts, eggs, those kinds of things. And I'll often, if I'm treating a condition, so if someone has gut issues or any medical condition, autoimmune conditions, I'm usually taking dairy out of their diet anyway. So if you're Googling, you're not wanting to do bacon and cream all day long. So I generally will say to patients, first start drinking ketones first thing in the morning, intermittent fasting. So drink your ketones on an empty stomach first thing in the morning. Introduce your intermittent fasting. That means you have 2 meals left in the day, lunch and dinner, and only one of those meals can contain a carbohydrate. Both meals have to contain a fat and a protein. So you need to have some kind of meat, a chicken, a something. You need to have some kind of fat, whether that's olive oil or some avocado, and only one of those meals can have a carb, and then go nuts on your veggies. So that's usually how I structure it. When you do that, you will be much closer to keto than you think. And then all we do later on, once you've adjusted to that, is start to look at reducing the carbohydrate consumption, if needed, depending on the type of carb you've chosen to introduce into one of your meals. So recap: ketones in the morning, intermittent fasting, so no breakfast. So skip your breakfast, have your ketones. You can eat lunch and dinner, and only one of those meals can contain a carb. Both of those meals have to have a protein and some fat. And that's a really easy way to transition. I don't usually have patients start tracking their food. I don't usually have people start tracking their food initially. That's sort of something I'll do down the road. Again, when you're talking about how it's all very intimidating and overwhelming, we just want easy things first. And then after about 4 to 6 weeks, that's when we start tweaking, when you become adjusted and used to that way of eating and the fasting and introducing the ketones. And then at that point, we start to make adjustments. I find that that's really an easy way to get started. So talking about hormones, how do you incorporate electrolytes? Actually, I'll mention that one first. So the electrolytes, you just pour them right into your ketones, mix them, and you drink it together. That's the easiest way to do it. You're welcome to drink your electrolytes at other points in the day. You also want to make sure you're drinking a significant amount of water. But yep, you just mix your electrolytes, your Mitoplex right in with your ketones, and you drink it together. That's generally the easiest way to do it. So questions about your cycle, and will ketones alter or change your cycle in any way? So I'm going to say that depends. We do know that there is some research looking at the role of beta hydroxybutyrate with respect to women who have PCOS, so polycystic ovarian syndrome. And these women often have irregular cycles, or they have anovulatory cycles, so they're not ovulating. Sometimes they can go months without a cycle. There's a tendency to weight gain, obesity, insulin resistance. And in those women, we actually do see some changes in their cycle when they start a ketogenic diet or exogenous ketones. It's those women specifically that I'm wanting to make those, that really need to make those diet changes as well. So I'll have them take ketones, but they have to make those diet changes. And what that can do is it has been shown to actually encourage ovulation in those women who are not ovulating. And also to regulate their cycle. So some women who haven't had a cycle in 4, 6, 8 months, it can actually bring on a cycle, or has been shown to regulate a cycle in some women. And so generally what I say is, so the question is, can it alter a cycle? Generally what I say to women is, give yourself a 3 to 6 month period of time before determining how it's impacted your cycle. Anytime there's an impact on our hormones, you have to wait more than just one cycle to see what's happening. It doesn't usually throw off a regular cycle in a woman that is hormonally balanced. So I would start looking at a few other things. If you have always had a regular cycle, you're hormonally balanced, and now your cycles are off, I would start looking into a few other things to make sure nothing else is going on. Because again, ketones and the ketogenic diet are not likely to throw off your cycle in that way. So it's not likely it's going to do that, but it has been shown to impact cycles in general. So that's why I say to women, give yourself a 3 to 6 month period of time just to see and allow your hormones to regulate and to allow your cycles to get back into a regular pattern. So how many packs of ketones would I recommend someone drink in order to lose weight? I usually recommend 2 in a day. The only time I recommend 3 is if I'm looking for some kind of therapeutic benefit. So I'm usually looking 2 in a day. So first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, if you can, if it gives you digestive issues, then take it with a meal that has a little bit of fat in it. And that usually helps take away any, if you get sort of diarrhea or nausea or anything like that. And then second serving in the afternoon, kind of midday, where you might have a bit of an energy dip. Or if you're working out, about 30 to 60 minutes before workouts, that's usually the best way to fit them in. And then speaking about weight loss, somebody asked a little bit earlier about fasting windows. So for weight loss, one of the things I also recommend is getting that intermittent fasting, and specifically the more extended intermittent fasting, the reboot. And so that's what I usually encourage that people incorporate in when it comes to weight loss. And someone asked about how are the fasting times I suggest for my patients. So what I generally suggest is the intermittent fasting is 16-hour window. So 16 hours from your last meal in the evening until your first meal the next day. Once a week, 24 hours, dinner to dinner, and once a month, a reboot. And then I think I just saw a question of, will it slow fat loss in there? And the question is no, it should not slow your fat loss when you're consuming exogenous ketones. And if you're finding that you're not losing weight the way you feel you should be losing weight, or the way you'd like to be losing weight, then I think there are a few other things you have to consider. You have to look at the microbiome. Do you have underlying inflammation? Do you have underlying hormonal imbalance, a thyroid issue, anything like that? Because all of those things will contribute. To impeding somebody's weight loss goals. So you have to look at underlying factors. The other thing as well is to make sure you're looking at, if you're actually, someone just asked about menopause, that's what I was about to talk about. If you're in menopause, then you have to make sure that your hormones are balanced. You might want to consider bioidentical hormones if that is safe for you. So these are other things to consider if you're noticing that your weight loss goals are not being met. The biggest thing to consider, though, that people often don't is stress. So often people will introduce new supplements and they'll say, this doesn't work for me, I'm not losing weight. And you have to look into the stress, and is your body spiking cortisol at all? And if you are, cortisol is a fat storage hormone. It's going to cause weight gain right around the middle. So again, you have to make sure that you're looking into other lifestyle factors that will impede that. But no, taking exogenous ketones shouldn't impede your fat loss. There is some research that shows that beta-hydroxybutyrate can actually promote fat loss as well. So again, if you're having some issues, or you're not really you're not hitting your weight loss goals, and you have to look at underlying principles and then consider adding some of those fasting measures in. And then the question about someone who has already been through menopause, I don't know if the question is if there is benefit to you if you've already been through menopause. Is there any point in taking exogenous ketones? And so yes, absolutely, you can still take ketones if you're in menopause. I always encourage women to follow a ketogenic diet as well, or at least a low carb diet when they move into menopause. That drop in hormones, that decline in those hormone levels, will naturally cause women to become insulin resistant, to have elevated cortisol levels. They naturally gain weight right around the middle. So there is a lot of benefit that they can experience from those specific changes. So yes, if you're in menopause, I would still encourage you to start taking your exogenous ketones or follow a ketogenic diet. There is still some great benefit there. So lots of questions about testing that I'm seeing going through here, urine, blood. So I mentioned a little bit earlier that the best way to test is through blood. So you want to test your blood ketone levels, not your urine ketone levels. That's the best way really to determine if you have absorbed your ketones or what is in your system. So always measure your blood ketone levels. What if you've had a complete hysterectomy? Yes, absolutely. You can still take your exogenous ketones, and you can still follow a ketogenic diet if you've had a hysterectomy, but you might need some more support, obviously some hormonal support. So you might want to be looking at bioidentical hormones as well, because again, ketones will not cure every medical condition. So it's really important to make sure you're looking at other underlying factors that might be playing a role. So what about ketones and Candida in the gut? Can it fuel or diminish Candida in the gut? So exogenous ketones, I wouldn't say that on its own would diminish Candida in the gut. It absolutely won't fuel Candida growth in the gut. One of the first things we're doing with the Candida diet as well is eliminating the carbohydrates. So with Candida, I'm absolutely putting people on a low-carb ketogenic diet, because carbohydrates will feed Candida. They make it worse. And the ketones will not fuel the Candida either. So this is actually one of my foundation treatments for Candida, but then there are a few other things that you need to add in order to actually kill the Candida. So again, it's not going to fuel it, but you want to merge that with a ketogenic diet, and then with an actual sort of anti-Candida protocol and supplements and things like that. That's really what you want to add in to target and kill the Candida as well. So top benefit of exogenous ketones for seniors. That's a great question. I'd probably say that the two biggest things would be the mental clarity and the impact on cognition. So I guess that's kind of wrapped into one. But for seniors, I would say that's probably the greatest difference. We know that as we age, obviously, we're experiencing cognitive decline. And when we experience cognitive decline, it's not something that happens at one point in time. It's 5, 10, 15 years of accumulated time or stress that's starting to impair our cognition overall. And what happens when we see cognitive decline is that our brain has stopped being able to use glucose as a primary fuel source. But even though that is impaired, the brain can still use ketones as a fuel source. And so what happens when we can't use glucose as our fuel source is the brain downregulates, because it says I'm not getting the fuel, so I'm going to downregulate function, so I stop asking for something I can't have. And so that's where we see the function of the brain begin to decline more and more, because there's no fuel available. And then the interesting thing about that, though, is, again, this happens before you see symptoms of cognitive decline. So somebody might say, well, my brain is fine, I don't have any memory issues, but you still want to provide that fuel source, because it's not like one day your brain uses glucose, the next day it doesn't. It's not an instantaneous thing. It's something that happens gradually. And so that glucose impairment has been happening for years. And it's been happening for years. So yes, absolutely, that would be an indication or a reason why they would want to add ketones in to provide that fuel source and try and optimize brain function. Somebody mentioned the fulvic acid. So yes, that's a good point, actually. That last question I answered on Candida. The fulvic acid has been shown to have some antimicrobial benefit, so that there may be some benefit in somebody who is suffering from Candida there as well to take the black label instead. However, even in that instance, you would still need another sort of more targeted protocol to really get rid of that Candida. But yes, that's a great point and a great comment that fulvic acid would be helpful in that case as well. So does keto cream break the fast? This is everyone's favorite question. And I get this question a lot, especially after the live. So technically, yes, the keto cream technically does break your fast. I do allow my patients to have a keto cream in the morning and their ketones in their morning in that fasting window. And I find we still get really great benefits from fasting. The only time I would take the keto cream out in that fasting window is if I'm finding we're not getting the benefits that we're looking for. I have to say that I've only ever done that once, where I've had a patient stop that keto cream in the fasting window, because and usually that's in somebody who's really insulin resistant, they're spiking insulin. And so I've only once had somebody stop doing that, but otherwise I generally say, yes, you can have your keto cream. But my suggestion usually, and I had another question as well, is how do you stagger keto cream and ketones? Usually what I encourage is starting your day with your ketones, and then later in the day, having your keto cream. So sometimes we'll do that in reverse. Some people like their keto cream in the morning, ketones a little bit later in the morning. So what I generally suggest is take your ketones first thing in the morning, and then when your fasting window is over, at whatever time that might be, 10, 11, and then so at 11 o'clock, have your keto cream. So that's generally how I have people stagger it. So it's more towards the end of your fasting window anyway. But again, a lot of people I do allow my patients to have the keto cream in that fasting window. But yes, technically, for those who ask that question, because I get that question all the time, technically, yes, it does break the fast, but I do still allow it in that fasting window. So what's the latest in ketone technology that I've recently heard? I love that question, and I'm going to say I hope that you're all going to be attending Epik, the Epik event, our virtual Epik this year. I'm so happy we're still able to have an Epik event, just a little bit differently than it's been in the past. And I would say the best answer to that question is to attend Epik, to listen to all the incredible speakers, because we're always presenting, they're always presenting the newest research. And so I'm always learning from some of the other speakers as well. This year, my focus has been a lot on the microbiome. So my presentation focuses a lot on microbiome, ketones, MCT oil, and fasting, and the impact that has on our gut, and the impact that our gut microbiome has on our health in general. So that's really one of my primary focuses, and there's some really great research coming out right now looking at the role that these things play in our gut microbiome. We look at the gut-brain connection, and really how ketones can impact all of those systems as well. So that's something that I'm really focused on and invested in right now. But I would say to really get a whole sort of broad spectrum of the new research is to come to the Epik event, listen to some of the speakers, because we're always talking about some of the new research or the new things that we're looking into. So mine right now is the microbiome. But again, Epik would be a great place to get some of that information. So asking about intermittent fasting. So if you're fasting for 16 hours, your last meal is at 7, and you drink your ketones in the morning. Sorry, your question is going up quickly. So I think you're just asking when to have your ketones. If your last meal is at 7, you can have your ketones in the morning before your fasting window is over. So yes, so essentially what we're trying to do in that fasting window, and we have years and years of research when it comes to fasting and the benefits of fasting, what it does. And what they're starting to see is that they think that the benefits of fasting are due to the production of ketones. So we're trying to elevate blood ketone levels in that fasting window. And there are other benefits as well, obviously the impact that fasting has on insulin and things like that. But we're looking at what we're trying to do is improve or promote ketone production in that fasting window. And so that's always why I allow my patients to have ketones in their fasting window, because we're just enhancing and sort of optimizing what it is we're trying to do already. And so I'm seeing tons of blood pressure questions, tons and tons of blood pressure questions. So is it safe? And the brain health question I just touched on a little bit earlier. So is it safe to take ketones if you're on blood pressure medication or if you have high blood pressure? So the answer to that is you have to work with your healthcare provider. They have to tell you that that's safe for you. You have to determine if you have a sodium sensitivity or whatever that might be. The research does show that beta-hydroxybutyrate may be beneficial with respect to blood pressure or cholesterol levels, waist circumference. So again, there's research to support that it could be beneficial, but they're not going to cure any medical condition. You have to work with your healthcare provider. Especially if you're on a medication, you have to work with your healthcare provider there as well. We have a lot of patients on blood pressure medication, and we just have them take it away from their medication. I'm on blood pressure medication for the past year, and I've been taking ketones the whole time as well. And I just leave a little bit of time in between the ketones and in between taking medication. So there's no sort of direct interaction from certain ones. Again, you have to work with your healthcare provider, make sure that they say that that's safe for you. And the research is showing that there could be some benefit there. So I think that is our time for today. That flew by today. Hopefully I answered most or all of your questions. I'm seeing lots of comments about Epik, and yes, Epik is going to be such a great event. We're really excited. Again, it's a little bit different this year, but so many really great ways to interact with the Pruvit community, really great presentations. So I hope you're all able to come. I can't wait to connect with you there as well. And I'll go back through, answer any questions that I may have missed here. But again, hopefully we'll see you all virtually at Epik this year. So stay healthy, stay safe, everyone.